All right, welcome back to Buck What You Heard. My name is Gene. You can reach me at Buck What You Heard. You follow me, I will follow you back. Um, we are joined today by Aaron Freeman of Locked on Falcons, right?
Yep.
And you are you writing anywhere else right now?
Not currently. Just on the audio waves on the podcast right now.
Oh, okay, all right. So any are you looking to be writing anytime soon?
Not really. I mean, I did a lot of writing from like 2013 to 2016. I felt like I wrote everything I possibly could have write back then. So it's not something I miss, but occasionally I'll come up with a thought and like, oh, this would make a good article. And then, 5 minutes later, I'm like, it'll make a better podcast.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Um, you know, I've been really looking at the Atlanta Falcons, and I tell you what, it's just like they're the most mysterious team in the NFC South right now because you haven't really heard a lot of noise from them. You saw kind of what they did with the draft, and they really, other than that, there wasn't a whole lot really going on other than bringing in some key pieces in free agency. And I guess my question to you would be, what exactly is going on? Are they looking to evaluate a little bit of the talent that they have there?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the big topic of conversation this offseason. And as I told you before we went live, I went into this offseason with a new head coach, with a new general manager, that the Falcons were going to make some big, bold moves in terms of, sort of putting them on a certain path for their long-term future and the long-term vision of what what this new regime would bring to the table in Atlanta. And they didn't really do that, right? They kind of did some restructure. They were working around the cap. They weren't dealing with a lot of cap space this offseason. The biggest, boldest move that they made this offseason was getting rid of Julio Jones. And, like it's one of those things where what their vision of this football team moving forward is a little bit of a question mark. And I think a lot of that depends on how well this team performs this upcoming season, how well Matt Ryan performs this upcoming season to indicate his long-term future. They have several other players that are due for big money contract extensions like Calvin Ridley, Grady Jarrett. Obviously, they brought in a long-term building block piece like Kyle Pitts and whatnot. They added some pieces in the secondary in the draft and whatnot. But for the most part, like they haven't really made these sort of long-term commitments to anybody so far. And I'm looking forward to seeing what type of commitments, particularly next offseason, they wind up doing. But I think a lot of that's going to depend on how well players perform or don't perform this upcoming season. So it's certainly an interesting time in the Falcons with this current regime coming into the building.
Yeah. So, they're, and Ruth, I'll let you chime in here. I don't want you to feel like you're being left out here. I know with Terry Fontenot coming in as general manager, what were your first thoughts? I mean, when you're looking at him as your general manager, here's a guy that's going to be evaluating talent and helping with contracts and that kind of thing. How does he fit with what Atlanta is wanting to do?
Yeah, that's the interesting thing because like he comes from the New Orleans Saints, and we know that the Saints these last 4-ish years have been building a team, trying to sort of reload a team to compete at the highest levels for Super Bowls. Unfortunately, if you're a Falcon fan, they did not achieve that. Probably fortunately, if you're a Bucs fan as well, they always seem to fall short to much hilarity, at least to the Falcons faithful in the postseason. And so you kind of look at Terry Fontenot when they hired him based off of that. You're like, oh, the Falcons are going into not a rebuild, but a reload. And they're going to try to maximize this last couple of windows with Matt Ryan and with Julio Jones that they have, similar to what the Saints were trying to do with Drew Brees these last couple of years. But then obviously the Falcons wind up trading Julio Jones. So that's out the window. And so you do wonder, like Terry Fontenot says all the things of we don't believe in rebuilding or anything like that. But at the same time, you do wonder if this team is ready to compete at the highest levels, this year, next year, or whenever. And so you're sort of stuck in this place of like, what is the plan with Terry Fontenot? And I think, the Falcons are doing things that are setting up a lot of possibilities, but sort of which path they wind up going down. If this is a team that's going to go all in on trying to win, a Super Bowl in the next 3 years, that you have Matt Ryan before he turns, 30, 39, 40, or is this a team that's trying to balance long-term building with short-term success, or is it ultimately going to be a long-term sort of rebuild? We don't quite know the answer to that. And again, my initial impression with Terry Fontenot was that it was going to be more of that short-term reload and going all in. But based off of the moves that have been made so far, it seems like they're kind of towing that line and trying to find that balance in between the 2 points.
No, absolutely. I feel the same way. I feel like it's very up in the air with the Atlanta Falcons with what direction that they are going into. But with the draft, how did you think the organization made that move with the 4th pick, choosing Kyle Pitts? Do you think he's going to be that, I guess, replacement for Julio Jones, or how did the team take that with that 4th pick? Because I've talked to a lot of Atlanta Falcons fans, and a lot of them say that it was unfortunate that they picked up Kyle Pitts because they wanted Justin Fields. So I'm thinking that they don't see a long-term with Matt Ryan, that he might be seeing his way out of there soon. But with picking Kyle Pitts with the 4th pick, it kind of says something different. So what did you think the organization, what direction they were trying to move in?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing was, like, very early in the offseason, I was very much of the mindset that the Falcons could or would wind up taking Kyle Pitts. Because of that belief in sort of, let's reload this thing. Let's get another weapon for Matt Ryan to throw to in order to maximize this window with him and Julio Jones. And then as the offseason progressed and seeing the Falcons kind of play it cool, it seemed like, okay, maybe they're in for the long-term rebuild, and that would precipitate them taking the quarterback in Justin Fields, who I thought was definitely worthy of that selection at number 4 overall. So the time we got the draft day, I fully expected that pick to be Justin Fields. And then so when it was Kyle Pitts, I was like, that's interesting, because it seemed like the Falcons were on this path for more of a long-term rebuild by taking the quarterback, and instead went with Kyle Pitts. And, we found out later on, because of all the Julio Jones stuff, that maybe knowing that Julio Jones asked to be traded earlier that offseason led to the Falcons going more in that Kyle Pitts direction and wind up taking the big-time weapon to replace the big-time weapon that Matt Ryan had spent the bulk of the last decade throwing to. So, I think with Kyle Pitts, the expectations are really high. So far in training camp, he's kind of lived up to those expectations. He's the highest drafted tight end in NFL history. We haven't seen tight ends have a lot of success early in their careers over the last, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, ask Jason Witten.
The Bucs have one of the few good rookie tight ends, and that was an undrafted free agent in Tim Wright several years ago. And since then, you got maybe like Evan Ingram and a couple other guys that have come in and made a name for themselves right away. But for the most part, you kind of get a growing year for these rookie tight ends, and Kyle Pitts is not going to have that luxury. With Julio Jones on the team, they would have had that luxury of letting Kyle Pitts fit in wherever he can, primarily in the red zone and maybe on third downs. But now he's going to have to be not only the red zone threat, not only their third down chain mover, but he's going to have to be an explosive playmaker to fill the void left by Julio Jones. So the Falcons are just heaping more and more on his plate, and it's going to be a question of whether he can handle that type of workload, handle those expectations. But so far, a week into training camp, he has seemingly lived up to those expectations, and we'll just see if this continues moving forward.
Yeah, I think the Kyle Pitts selection was pretty phenomenal, because if you have a generational talent like that, you got to take it when you can. So I wasn't mad about it. I like Matt Ryan personally, and I still think he has some good years on him. Seeing him play at the Raymond James Stadium at the end of last season, I already kind of had respect for Matt Ryan prior to that game, but seeing it up close and personal, I was like, this guy is really good. Like, he has an arm, he's accurate, and he has that connection with his wide receivers. I mean, Calvin Ridley had a ball game that game. I know you remember that, Gene, because it was kind of making us a little bit nervous. I mean, going into the fourth quarter, it was kind of like this game is over, but it was a little shaky at one point. So I like Kyle Pitts. I think he's a great addition for that offense, and I want to see what he has. I mean, he's got big shoulders, so I'm sure the weight is not a problem for him to carry.
Absolutely. Biggest wingspan, I think, in the league right now among receivers. Huge. So he can carry the burden physically, at least.
Somebody had mentioned in the comments about the O-line that it's questionable. What's your take on your O-line right now?
Yeah, big question mark. Big question mark right now. Right now, they had two holes going into the offseason at left guard and center, losing veterans like James Carpenter and Alex Mack. But, Alex Mack, probably a future Hall of Fame center, if I say so myself, all-decade team member, but wasn't quite great at the end of last season. Was dealing with some injuries in those final games, going up against the Bucks. James Carpenter was a big-time free agent signing 2 years ago, did not live up to expectations of solidifying that left guard position. So the Falcons had two holes there at that position going into the offseason. They wound up seemingly addressing it somewhat with draft picks, taking Jalen Mayfield in the third round, a right tackle at Michigan, with the expectation that he would come in and compete for that left guard spot. They drafted a center in Drew Dolman in the fourth round to come in and compete with the center that they drafted a year ago in Matt Hennessy in round 3. He was expected to sort of be the heir apparent to Alex Mack. But so far in training camp, because of an injury to the incumbent right tackle, Caleb McGarry, Jalen Mayfield's been getting the bulk of his reps at right tackle, working with that first team. And, until Caleb McGarry comes back, there's a decent to pretty good chance at this point that Jalen Mayfield will wind up being the Falcons starting right tackle week 1. So you have a rookie playing at one end of the line of scrimmage, and then you have potentially another rookie playing inside. And instead of pushing Matt Hennessy for a center position, Drew Dolman's starting to get more work at left guard to push the veteran backup that the Falcons signed to be a utility backup in Josh Andrews. And he's sort of currently penciled. So the offensive line is a big question mark because they're going to have probably 2 rookie starters, a third in Matt Hennessy if he winds up winning that center position, who's basically a first-time starter. And so you have 2 proven options on your offensive line with Jake Matthews at left tackle, very underrated left tackle. You have an emerging solid right guard in Chris Lindstrom, a player I compared to Ali Marpet in terms of what he can be in the NFL, and I think is well on that path to being one of the top guards in the NFL. But outside of that, big question marks for the Falcons offensive line. And when you look at some of the skill positions that the Falcons have added, that was the one question mark with this offense, and that could wind up holding it back. And, so far, the rookies are showing promise, but anybody knows that rookies are particularly not reliable as starters right away in the NFL, particularly on the offensive line. It usually takes the better part of like 3 or 4 years for offensive linemen to really hit. Bucs fans know that.
And real quick, if I can jump in here, Cordell Patterson, is he going to be an every down back? Is he somebody that they're going to really lean heavily on, or how are they going to utilize him in that offense?
Yeah, the expectation right now is he'll get some work primarily as a running back, maybe dabble as a wide receiver, similar to the role he's been used the last couple of years with the Patriots and Bears. Obviously, he's got the kick return skills, so that's the bulk of what he's going to be asked to do as one of the great kick returners in NFL history. But the expectation is he'll get some contributions in the passing game at the running back position. But right now, sort of who's going to be the number 2 running back behind Mike Davis, who's the presumptive starter there, is a big question mark right now. Quadri Olison, the Falcons' 5th round pick from 2019, is getting the bulk of those second team reps. They added a very explosive undrafted free agent in Javian Hawkins out of Louisville that's also expected to be in the mix. So Patterson is definitely going to be part of I guess you could call it a committee, at least to be that backup running back behind Mike Davis. But how big a part he's going to be, I think, is right now up in the air.
So one of the listeners out here, Play Reaction, was asking, what about Hawkins or Olison? Who gets the edge there?
It seems like right now Olison is getting the bulk of the reps. But one of the things I've been thinking about is, given the question marks you have with this Falcons offensive line, given that they're going to be focused on the outside zone running scheme that they utilized in the past under Kyle Shanahan and Steve Sarkisian. That's what Arthur Smith utilized in Tennessee with Derrick Henry. You want that running back to be able to get to the edge quickly. And given the concerns you have at the interior of the offensive line, you wonder if those guys are going to be able to get the push that you need. And so would that favor a running back a little bit that has a little bit more juice, like a Javian Hawkins, to favor him, that guy that can get quickly to the outside and get away from that penetration should it come up the middle. So I do think Hawkins has an opportunity this summer to show himself to be a regular part of the rotation. But basically what I'm saying is if there was a game tomorrow, I think Olison would get the bulk of those reps, but Hawkins will basically have, a couple of weeks to potentially leapfrog him.
Yeah. And right now is a good time for them both to get reps in. And I think that you will see both of them on the field at some point throughout the season. You got an extra game. So definitely looking forward to seeing who ends up with that starting position. There was somebody else I was going to ask you about. I know that you got Duran Harmon in a strong safety. How is he? Have you seen much from him yet in camp, or how is he doing in camp right now?
So far, the buzz on Duron Harmon has been generally solid. That's kind of what he is. He's a veteran, sort of kind of stopgap player, but has been solid wherever he's been, whether it was Detroit, whether it was New England. He's been a solid starter. He's a reliable veteran player, comes from that Belichick school of do your job. And primarily throughout his career, he's been a deep safety. That's the expectation that he'll be here in Atlanta, kind of quarterbacking the defense, given his veteran experience in that regard. And so far, he seems to be delivering on that. Obviously, we'll sort of see how he performs during the regular season and in a couple of weeks in the preseason. But, I think the expectations right now for Duron Harmon that he is on the path to being what he has been, for the last 7-8 years in the NFL, which is a pretty consistent, reliable veteran starter.
And I think with your secondary, especially, you need consistency back there. And you just need guys to stay healthy throughout the season as well. Anybody else flashing or standing out for you in camp so far? So you get,
and
I realize you have to take it with a
it's because you get so much about like, oh, this guy's really standing out, and you're like, is he, or is did you just have no expectations for that player? So I'm trying to think of somebody who is kind of, I guess I'll go with the wide receiver position because that's a position that's up in the air given the loss of Julio Jones. And we know that Calvin Ridley's already going to be poised to take on that mantle as the number one wide receiver. You guys have already talked about how well he performed in Julio's absence late last season against teams like the Bucs and others. Russell Gage, who was the number 3 last year, their slot receiver, has been basically gotten the call to get promoted to the number 2 guy. And really the question entering Falcons training camp is who's going to be that third guy. The Falcons are primarily going to be a 2 tight end offense with Kyle Pitts and Hayden Hurst. And so they're not going to use a ton of 3 wide receiver sets, but obviously you're going to use some of that some of the time. And who's going to be that guy? And Olamide Zaccheaus.
There you go. I was just going to
say
that was
the name I was just about to. I was just reading on him. Like he had a great focus in training camp today.
Yeah. So Zaccheaus is, I have made claims in the past that I think Zaccheaus, like pound for pound, he's a smaller guy, but maybe the second most talented wide receiver on the Falcons roster over a player like Russell Gage. And that's not a dismiss of Gage. It's just an indicator that I think Zaccheaus has a lot of potential that he hasn't quite really had an opportunity to show in past years because of how relatively top heavy the Falcons receiver core was with Julio Jones and Ridley and Mohamed Sanu and Gage emerging in recent years. So I think this is an opportunity for Olamide Zaccheaus to sort of step up and show that he has the ability to be potentially a top 3 wide receiver for a lot of teams. A player that he kind of reminds me of that Bucs fans are familiar with is Adam Humphries. I think he can have a similar and higher impact moving forward for the Falcons. Maybe Scotty Miller is another good comparison just because Zaccheaus brings a little bit more of that vertical playmaking ability than Humphries did. But I think he's a player that so far the early buzz in training camp has been that he has been stepping up. He's sort of the front runner to be that third option at the wide receiver position. So he's been a player that I'm definitely keeping my eye on, and certainly in the coming weeks when we get to the preseason action, get to see exactly what he's delivering on.
So the starting nose tackle that returned to practice today, I believe it's Tyler Davison. How do you think he's looking coming back from injury?
Yeah, I mean, Davidson's just kind of a steady Eddie. He's going to come in. He's going to plug the run. He's not going to be flashy. He's not going to be sexy. He's the second most proven defensive lineman on the team right now behind Grady Jarrett. Obviously, he's not bringing the same value as a pass rusher and every down disruptor that Grady Jarrett's bringing. But, he's just a solid player. You kind of know what you're going to get for Tyler Davison. And so the question with him is going to be health. And, so far in his Falcon career, he's been pretty healthy. I think the Falcons are sort of being cautious, as teams are always going to be this point in the summer, and not try to, force a guy to play. If you can rest them for a couple of days, give him some rest. And I think that's been the case with Tyler Davison. And I think moving forward, he'll be a solid presence for the Falcons front.
Hey, I want to stay on this subject here because we were talking a little bit about the pass rush. And somebody had mentioned, the Falcons lack the pass rush. how do you see them manufacturing that pass rush or getting pressure on the quarterback? Do you think with the new regime that you have in place, um, do you see them being able to manufacture that pass rush, throughout the season?
Yeah, another great question, and one that I've been talking out about a lot on Locked On Falcons over the last several months. They bring in Dean Pease. He's bringing in the system. He basically comes in his opening press conference back in January saying that we're going to blitz from everywhere. And it seems clear that they're going to rely on manufacturing pressure with those blitzes to generate a lot of the pass rush that they're not going to be able to get reliably with four, because, basically it's Grady Jarrett and then a whole bunch of other guys in terms of their pass rush. There's some other decent options, but nobody that's, striking fear in opposing quarterbacks, with guys like Dante Fowler and Marlon Davidson not coming off great 2020 campaigns. Maybe they'll be better in 2021. But, the Falcons going to rely heavily on that blitz. And that was something that they had to do last year when Raheem Morris was calling defense when he took over as the interim head coach after Dan Quinn's firing in week 5. And one of the things that they did under Morris once he took over as the head guy, they dialed up their blitz a lot more. And it was pretty effective for about a month. But then in the back half of the season, it wasn't nearly as effective because, in the NFL, teams start to figure you out. You can't surprise teams with your blitz after a certain amount of weeks. And so I wonder a little bit, is Dean Pease going to be able to change up that narrative? Is he going to be able to fix that formula where their blitz is going to be more effective than 4 to 5 or 4 to 6 weeks in the season? Is it going to be effective for 14 to 16 weeks in an NFL season? That's a big question. And it's kind of, if not, then we're just kind of probably going to see what we saw last year, which was a defense that when it's on looks good, and then a defense that when it's not on looks pretty bad. And that winds up being a pretty average defense, on the balance of things, or below average defense in the Falcons case, because there's generally been a lot more bad than good. And so you just kind of wonder if that's going to change with the Dean Pease and this new coaching staff, or are we just going to get a continuation of what we've seen? Like last year's defense for the Falcons was probably the best defense of the Dan Quinn era, if you look at certain metrics, but it still was a below average defense. And so is that something that we're going to see improve with this new regime, or is it going to stay basically the same? And we're, a year or so down the road, the Falcons going to be making major investments to rebuild that defense in the future. And that's a big question hanging over the season. And obviously the more holes and the more areas of this roster that they can address, and more guys that can emerge this upcoming season to be part of that defensive equation, certainly the better for this team in the long term.
So how are they set as far as depth? I mean, do you feel comfortable with this team? Because when I look at the Falcons last year, and I watched quite a few games, I saw a scheme that could work if you have the right pieces in place. And to me, it looked like, I don't know if it was injury or people weren't at 100%. I'm not making excuses, but it just looks like this scheme could have worked, but you just didn't have the depth you didn't have the horses to really run the defense.
Yeah, man, it's, the Falcons from a defensive talent standpoint, it's Grady Jarrett. AJ Terrell looks like he's going to be a stud for them. We know Deion Jones is a high-level linebacker when he's on his game. He wasn't on it for most of last year. Hopefully that changes with the defensive coaching change. Foye Olokun had a really promising year last year playing beside him at linebacker. And then outside of that, you didn't see a lot of great play from the Falcons. They have some decent role players. And so the hope is that you can get some of those top end players playing better, and then you can just get decent to league average play from the rest of the starting lineup. And if you get that, then you're not going to be a good defense, but you're just going to be decent. You're going to be consistent, right? And if your offense is clicking like the Falcons hope it is, then that's kind of all you need. That's when the Falcons have been successful in past years under Dan Quinn, where they had this potent offense and just a defense that was just good enough, right? To keep you in games late in the game, maybe get a couple of stops here or there, rather than these collapses that have plagued the Falcons these last couple of years. If this defense can just get stops because their top end players are playing at a high level and their less than top end players are just decent, they're just doing their job, as we talked about with Daron Harmon, then I think you have a defense that can be quote unquote good enough. But if the offense isn't clicking and you have deal with injuries to some of those top end players that we talked about, and the coaching staff isn't able to turn the Daron Harmons and the Tyler Davidsons of the world and they're a lot more inconsistent, then you're going to get the same issues that the Falcons have been dealing with defensively these last several years, which is a very inconsistent unit that is more often bad than good. And, unless your offense is just dropping 40 burgers every single week, that's not going to lead to a lot of success in this league. So, right now I look at the defense and I have major concerns, but we'll just sort of have to see. For me, a lot of it is hoping that the offense is just going to be able to mask a lot of the issues, like we saw with this team, even going back to the Super Bowl year where, that defense wasn't very good for most of that season. And it was really just basically the offense just when they needed to score 40 plus points a game to win a game, they did it until they didn't.
I feel like the Dallas Cowboys are kind of in a very similar situation where their defense was just astronomically bad last year to the point where they're hoping that Dak Prescott coming back means the offense is just going to mask what the defense is fumbling. So I'm hoping for a better season defensively for both the Atlanta Falcons and the Dallas Cowboys, just to make the game more entertaining. Like if you keep letting people score so easily, like the game just kind of sucks the life out of the game for me.
Yes, a lot of bad quarterbacks.
So high expectations for the defense this year. Yeah. I mean, not everybody can be a complete team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where I think maybe the special teams might be their only weak spot, maybe. And I mean, not talking down to Ryan Suckup because we saw how he performed at an all-star level last season.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, the play reaction was asking, in retrospect, do you feel Dimitroff should have been fired with Mike Smith? I've never been a fan of his drafting.
I mean, if you had asked me probably around 2015, I would have said, yeah. I felt like Dimitroff did a much better job drafting overall than people give him credit for. I think people tend to highlight the misses because when you lose your job, that's all that anybody pays attention to. And when you're in your job, then no one cares about the misses. They just care about, hey, man, look how great, Deion Jones is. Look how great Julio Jones is and all these various things. So I feel like Dimitroff's drafting was not really the issue. I think the real thing that really hurt Dimitroff was just how often they whiffed in free agency, that they would just basically be spending gobs and gobs of money on players and get almost no return on this. Is basically Michael Turner, Alex Mack, maybe Mohamed Sanu, depending on your perspective. And outside of that, in 13 years of free agency, you didn't get a lot of good additions in sort of the month of March for the Falcons. They made a couple of decent trades like Tony Gonzalez and Asante Samuel, but whatnot. So I feel like you can certainly make an argument that Dimitroff should have gotten the axe sooner. But I don't think the Falcons' failures are solely on their personnel decisions. I think a lot of it was that the Falcons over the last couple of years since their Super Bowl year have operated like a team that thought they were Super Bowl contenders and basically only spent the minimum amount of money that they needed to in order to plug this hole, to draft, this sort of stopgap piece for their team. And what happened was, they operated like a team that was capable of competing at the highest level, but they didn't perform like a team. And I think more of that is on the coaching than it is on the front office. And I think that's why a lot of people are excited about what Arthur Smith is going to do this year. And Dean Pease, the defensive coordinator, because there's a lot of expectations that we will see this year's Falcon team deliver on the potential and the expectations that previous teams seem to underachieve. I tend to be skeptical of that because I've been hearing that story for Falcons for many, many years. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. More often than not, they don't deliver on that expectation. But we'll just sort of have to see if Arthur Smith is the outlier in this regard and can deliver on that.
Man, I feel your pain because I can tell you the Buccaneers in all the years of mismanagement, whiffing on free agents, whiffing in the draft, and, finally getting it all to turn around. I mean, I totally get what you're talking about. And there are a lot of players and you're like, well, why did you draft him? I mean, where does he fit into this? And I'm sure that, you've seen a lot of that as well, with your teams as you've been following them along. And there was another question here. Could you ask Aaron, will there be more aggressive free agency or solely rely on picks like Dimitroff did moving forward? Do you see this as the example moving forward, or is this just I think we talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the show. Are they looking to see what they have with these players right now before they make the final decision on what they're going to do? I mean, if Matt Ryan has a decent year, do you try to go ahead and continue building that offense around him, or do you plan for somebody to come in and succeed him, or how does this team move forward from here, or does it kind of depend on what they do this season?
Yeah, I think this season is a pivotal year for them because I think it will somewhat determine what direction they head on after this year. Because if they're successful, let's say the Falcons have a winning record, 9-8, 10-7, whatever the case may be, whether that's a wild card team or at least a team going into the final few weeks of the season in wild card contention, that's a positive for this team moving forward. And I think that's a team that can approach next offseason and say, look, we're going to have to restructure some contracts. We're going to have to extend some guys, but we can free up the cap space to make this team and give them that last little push to make them a firm a postseason contender in this division and potentially make a run at a team like the Bucs, who most people recognize, myself included, are sort of the team to dethrone in the division right now, coming off their Super Bowl season. And, that's one path the Falcons can take. And that's an easier path and a less bitter pill to swallow if the Falcons are coming off a successful 2021. But if they win like 6 games this year and you have a now 37-year-old Matt Ryan making nearly $49 million and counting $49 million against the salary cap next year, are you going to feel great about extending him? Are you going to feel great about restructuring that again? And so you're in this predicament where, if it goes down the wrong path, and this team is not nearly as successful as I think a lot of people expect them to be this upcoming season, did you just basically postpone rebuild a year longer than you necessarily have to do so? You had a golden opportunity to draft your quarterback of the future in Justin Fields at number 4 overall, and particularly in a year where if Justin Fields comes in and plays really well for the Chicago Bears, who are a team that, at least in theory, feel like they're a playoff contending team that just needs a quarterback upgrade. And if he delivers on that, you're going to look at the Falcons front office and saying, like, the only thing that's going to quiet people from criticizing you for passing on that type of player is if you yourself are in the playoffs and wind up outperforming the Bears or whatever the case may be. So they're kind of at a fork in the road in terms of what direction they're headed on. And so to answer the question, like, I don't know the answer. Like, it just kind of depends on, could they go heavy in free agency next offseason? Absolutely. I could see that path happening, particularly in a year where they are successful and win games and feel like, okay, let's manipulate the cap. Let's kick this can down the road, do what the Saints did for years and years when Terry Fontenot was working in that organization. And let's just kick the salary cap can down the road and see how many games and how much of a contender we can build right now. Or they could be in a situation where it's like, look, we're going to focus on the draft. We're going to try to purge some of these big contracts like we already did with Julio Jones. Maybe Matt Ryan's next. Maybe Grady Jarrett's next. Maybe Calvin Ridley, Deion Jones. Some of these players, there are some of the more expensive players. Jake Matthews also in that list. Maybe we need to start moving on from these guys and just start the rebuild now a year later than we initially planned on. So, the Falcons can go down either way. And I think this upcoming season will play a significant role in determining that.
So are they healthy as far as the salary cap goes going into next year? Will the Atlanta Falcons be able to be big players if they choose to do so with the cap next year? I mean, just based on the way everything is going right now.
Well, their cap situation is very similar to what it was this past offseason, where they're going to have to move some money around in order to get under the salary cap. Now, fortunately, the cap should rebound to 200 million plus, so they should get about $20 million in potential wiggle room. So that will make it less dire than it was this past offseason, where, they weren't as in dire situation as the Eagles and Saints, but they were right behind those teams in terms of needing to free up, $20-30 million to get under the salary cap. They'll probably have to free up a similar amount of money, but I think it'll be a little bit easier to do if you're coming off a winning record and you can sit there and say, look, we need this money to now invest on the offensive line, to invest in the defense, all the areas that we may have been weak in this past season, to improve that unit so that that's no longer an issue moving forward. So I think the Falcons will have the potential cap flexibility to be players if they choose to go down that route by restructuring and extending guys. But I think whether or not they choose to go down that route will sort of depend a lot on this upcoming season.
Ruth, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the comments are blowing up about the drafting situation in Atlanta. So, I mean, a lot of people are saying that they shouldn't have passed up on a generational talent like Justin Fields, but I'm okay with the Kyle Pitts pick. I think that tight end position will be golden for the next coming years, and hopefully he gets an extended long contract after his rookie deal with Atlanta. But what are your expectations going into this season? I mean, we're facing the Bucks. And week 2, Atlanta's going to be traveling to the Raymond James Stadium, and then again in week 13. So what are some expectations for the Atlanta Falcons and their record going into the season?
Yeah, I've broken it down a couple of times on Locked On Falcons over the last couple of months, since the schedule came out. I feel like given the Falcons are playing relatively, again, we don't know what this upcoming season, how good certain teams are going to be, but we look at the two divisions that they face in the AFC East and the NFC East that were arguably the two weakest divisions in the league last year in terms of quote unquote cupcake teams. I don't feel like a lot of those teams are going to completely become good overnight this upcoming season. So I think the Falcons will have some opportunities to get some wins there. And so basically the way I've kind of broken it down is you kind of have to win at least 3 games in the NFC South. You kind of have to win at least 4 games when you combine both those East divisions combined. So you got to go at least 500 against those 8 teams. You got the Detroit Lions, you have the San Francisco 49ers and the Jacksonville Jaguars as your 3 other remaining games. And you kind of expect this team, if they're good, to win at least 2 of those games. So you do the math on that, you're looking at like a 9-8 record. In my opinion, that would be a really good indicator that you performed up to expectations this upcoming season. Now, obviously, there's some give and take there, obviously putting, and saying like, oh, you're good if, there's obviously unknown circumstances, unknown variables that will occur over the course of the season that will adjust that. But when I look at the schedule, I'm like, if this team, if this coaching staff is as good as we want to believe it is, that they will be able to overachieve this upcoming season and get you to a winning record. And if they get you below that, there better be some, circumstances that will say, oh, well, they didn't get to, 9 wins because Matt Ryan missed 4 games, or they didn't get to 9 wins because Grady Jarrett was out for half the season, or some type of extenuating circumstances where you can excuse maybe losing to teams like the Giants, losing to teams like the Lions, teams that if you're a good football team, you fully expect to beat those teams. And so I think that's where sort of my expectations for this team heading into the season. I could very easily see this Falcon team going 5-12 this year, right? Just as well as I could see them, everything breaks their way and they go 12-5 this year. And they are like, this year's Cleveland Browns team that had a lot of potential, and with the new head coach, or, 2 years ago, the Packers, when they hired Matt LeBeau to be their head coach. And so like, I could see the Falcons being that team, as well as I could see them being a bad team that when you look at this roster, despite having a couple of star players like the Calvin Ridleys, the Matt Ryans, the Grady Jarretts, that, the rest of the roster just isn't good enough for them to be consistently winning games, right? Competitive, sure. I expect them to be in every game this year, as I think all fans expect their teams every single week, every single season. But whether or not they're going to have that extra little ability to win the close games that they consistently lost last year, that's an unknown. And I think that's going to be an indicator of improved coaching. And that's one of the reasons why, I'm sure people will think I'm being naive when I say this, but my expectation is that that coaching staff is going to live up to those expectations. And, this team is going to win 9 or 10 games this year and surprise a lot of folks. Sometimes when I sit here and look at this roster and I go, how is this team going to win 9 games this year? I certainly have those concerns, but right now, this is the point in the summer where you can still be very optimistic about teams' outcomes because you haven't seen any football be played quite yet. So that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the NFL kind of set you guys up beautifully facing the Eagles in week 1. They just got to, hand you your first win. So that I'm hoping that at least going into week 2 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that you guys will be at least 1-0.
That's the hope because, I'm not expecting the Falcons to beat the Bucs in week 2. So getting off to an 0-2 start would be not very great for this team.
Just kind of going around the NFC South. What are your thoughts on some of the other teams, as compared to what the Atlanta Falcons have done so far? how are you feeling about let's start with the New Orleans Saints, your arch enemies.
Yeah, I think the Saints are going to be in an interesting quandary given Michael Thomas's injury. And sort of my assumption now is like, oh, this is going to be Taysom Hill's job because they're not going to be able to throw the ball as much as they would want to with a healthy Michael Thomas. These, how isn't he out like 2 months or something like that? I forget.
It's like
because he had a procedure done on his ankle at the end of last season. I thought I was under the impression that he was going to be back for week 1, but maybe not.
No, he's out for at least 6 games, I thought.
That's not a good look for the Saints.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where I think they're going to have to lean heavily on Alvin Kamara in their running game to get them through that time. Yeah. And that would point to Taysom Hill being the starter for them. And so, I can't talk too much trash about Taysom Hill because he's beats the Falcons anytime he gets an opportunity. Like we're the one team that he goes off against and looks like the superstar that he is so often hyped to be. And so if you just watch his Falcons highlights, you're going to be like, this is the greatest quarterback. This guy's just as good as Patrick Mahomes. Against every other team, he's garbage. And, I hope the Falcons are at a point now where they can make him look like garbage. But yeah, I think the Saints are going to be an interesting team because, they've been a team that these last couple of years has played good defense and has very efficient quarterback play out of Drew Brees. I don't think you're going to get that with Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill now moving forward. And so I think their success hinges on their defense being able to keep them in games and keep, things low scoring enough where you're not going to necessarily need to put up, 24, 27, 30 points a game like they could usually rely on with Drew Brees to win games. So, the Saints are in an interesting place. I could see if their defense, as a known Saints hater, I'm not going to necessarily put too much stock in their defense quite yet, but I could see them doing some damage this year, and certainly can't count them out. Given the continuity they get from Sean Payton, that they're going to definitely be in the wild card mix. I just hope they're on the outside looking in.
Right. Like I haven't watched any Saints game prior to Drew Brees. So it's going to be a shakeup to see how that offense is going to play out, whether it be Taysom Hill or Jameis Winston. Do you think that Jameis Winston could beat Taysom Hill for that QB1 position?
Yeah, I think, in a equal competition, I think Jameis Winston is the better quarterback. I think Jameis Winston's ceiling is going to be higher. Maybe his floor could be lower if you get bad Jameis and turnover-prone Jameis, which you guys are very familiar with. Is the Jameis that we have seen, every day of his life up till this point. So, I think Jameis Winston should win the job. But again, I think with that Michael Thomas injury and basically the Saints being a one-man passing attack, which has been the case these last couple of years, and I don't see that changing, I don't see how they can rely on their passing game. And so therefore, the one strength that you could say that favors Jameis Winston, if you're looking at these two quarterbacks, who's going to be able to have a better chance of winning the game if you have to drop back and throw the ball 40 times a game? That's clearly Jameis Winston. It's not Taysom Hill's game. And so I don't know if the Saints are going to be that team regardless with Michael Thomas injured. So I think it kind of favors Taysom Hill for the time being. And so even though I think Jameis Winston is the better quarterback, I just think the way that they want to play, at least to start the season, is probably going to favor Taysom Hill more.
Interesting, because in my perspective on this, I consider Taysom Hill more of an offensive weapon. I don't consider him a quarterback. I don't consider him a guy that you would have your defensive coordinator game plan for this guy. I just don't think. I think you're taking away part of your offense for the New Orleans Saints by having him under center. I could see him coming in and rotating in plays like they did with him and Teddy Bridgewater, like they did with him and Drew Brees at times, because you can kind of put him anywhere along the line, basically. And he's pretty much successful. So, again, it's interesting that you've got two quarterbacks still competing for that starting position right now. And to me, that speaks volumes about the quarterback position in itself.
Yeah. Can someone tell Jameis, though, to stop posting those videos of him doing, I don't even know what, I guess him dancing in the pocket? Like, can we stop letting those videos go viral? It's not helping your cause, Jameis. I'm sorry.
Yeah. He's got an interesting workout regime.
Yeah, he could shut all that down on the field, but again, it is what it is. So I wanted to jump over to the Carolina Panthers, another team. Matt Rule, you got Joe Brady over there, and
I'm
what?
not gonna lie, I'm really excited to see Sam Darnold playing in a Carolina Panthers uniform. I have high hopes for him. It was really sucky how everything went down in New York, and I'm hoping that joining a new roster, having more weapons, he's just having a new organization that actually cares. I'm excited to see it. Sorry,
Yeah, I
Gene, I
think.
didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's going to be the big question with Sam Darnold. Is the player that existed in New York the last 2 years that's basically been one of the worst quarterbacks in the league? Is that a byproduct of Sam Darnold itself? Is that a byproduct of Adam Gase? Now that he has Joe Brady coaching him in Carolina, are we going to see more of the Sam Darnold that showed promise his rookie year, that looked like he was an ascending quarterback and flashed a lot of high-end traits that made him a top 3 pick in that 2018 draft? Or, are we just going to get a repeat of what we've seen, which is a lot more bad than good, and you'll get a splash play here or there? So I have my concerns with Sam Darnold right now. I liked him a lot coming into the league, but the way he's played these last couple of years, I've jumped completely off that bandwagon, and so I will believe it when I see it. When the old Sam Darnold is resurrected,
he sees ghosts.
And that's kind of
he's never going to be able to live that down. Like,
I just don't. I don't know. I think what you've seen from him is kind of who he is. It'll be interesting to see what he does with Joe Brady. Yes, but I don't know. I'm not 100% sold on him.
Yeah, I mean, for me, because I think a lot of us went into last season thinking, oh, Joe Brady, Teddy Bridgewater, this Panthers. Keep saying Bucks. Because I'm talking to you guys. This Panthers offense, looks surprisingly could surprise people with the weapons that they have with Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, he got hurt. Mike Davis emerged, wound up in Atlanta, but they had a really solid trio of receivers with Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, and DJ Moore. They lost Samuel. They bring in Terrace Marshall, the phenom from LSU. So they have the same pieces around Sam Darnold that they had around Teddy Bridgewater. It didn't lead to Teddy Bridgewater playing at a super high level. And so I think it's fair to be skeptical if, the same situation is going to lead to Sam Darnold getting significantly better in Carolina this upcoming season. So I think it's a big question. I think obviously the Panthers will go as far as Sam Darnold's willing to take them.
I would have to throw in Christian McCaffrey's name. I really do believe that the Panthers win at least 2 or 3 more games with a healthy Christian McCaffrey, and just what they had to work with for Teddy Bridgewater, they didn't really do him a whole lot of favors. Yeah, he's not that guy, not that dynamic player that you really want to see. But I think when you've got a key playmaker like Christian McCaffrey who's out, I mean, he's not really helping the team. He's not helping their cause.
Teddy Bridgewater ended up in Denver, correct?
That is correct.
All right.
So last but not least, I wanted to say the best for last, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And just wanted to, what are your thoughts on this team just going into this season as far as, personnel versus, what the Atlanta Falcons are bringing out?
Yeah, it was funny to me last year. You go back to that Bucs game long before they made their Super Bowl run, where playing the Falcons, I was like, oh, this is definitely going to be the team to beat next year. Even if they don't put it all together this season, you can already see the potential of that Bucs team in terms, and obviously they were able to capitalize that, thereafter with against several other NFC teams in addition to the Falcons and win the Super Bowl. So they certainly didn't underachieve that. But if they didn't win the Super Bowl last year, I think they would easily be the very sexy in vogue Super Bowl pick this upcoming season. Obviously, the team's coming back, basically the same exact team. I think you basically swapped out LaShawn McCoy for Gio Bernard. That's the only major change that you made to the roster. So the expectations are even higher that, they're going to pick up where they left off. And I think that's going to be the big question for this team. Are they going to get that sort of Super Bowl hangover of we're all riding high, we're going to pick up exactly where we left off, and we're not going to have to go through the process? And that could lead, particularly early in the season where they're getting, various teams' best punches, including from the Falcons. Does that lead to them, coming out of the gates sloppy and slow? Now, the good thing that the Bucs have going for them is they have Tom Brady as a quarterback, and obviously, if Tom Brady has any to say over it, he's not going to let that sort of complacency set in for them. But he can't control the other 52, heads and minds on that roster. So my only hope is that the Bucs partied too hard this offseason. They got lazy, in the lead up to the season, and they come out, thinking that their stuff doesn't stink, and they wind up underachieving early in the season and gives a team like the Falcons, a puncher's chance to take this division. But I think you can kind of tell that I don't think that's going to happen.
If this was 2016, 2017, or 2018, I would have been like, yeah, I think I can agree with you, because I've seen seasons where they win the off-season battle, where they get they win the free agency battle, but when it comes time to play, it's just not the same team. As you mentioned, Tom Brady being there, I don't believe that he's going to allow that to happen, as we were just talking about. And I think they're coming in prepared and getting ready, and hopefully they can pick off where they left off.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited for the week 1 matchup against Dallas. I think that's a perfect defense for Brady to chop up in week 1. So I'm really excited for that. And the way the training camp is going, it's pretty phenomenal. They've had a couple off days, but I mean, with these guys practicing in 100% humidity when it's like 104 degrees outside, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to clean things up offensively. But I'm really excited to see the momentum that they're going to start, the season with. I believe we have the Bengals and then the Titans for preseason, if I'm not wrong.
I believe.
Do you know our preseason games?
I believe so. I have to pull that up.
Bengals and Tennessee, I believe. I think Tennessee might be their 3rd preseason game.
Okay.
Yeah, but I have high expectations for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I know. Can you believe that Tom Brady turned 44 years old yesterday, guys? Can we just all on that for a second? Like, oh my goodness, 44 years old, still doing it.
Oh, so Ruth,
much to my chagrin.
Plus was saying you're right, and then Bud was saying that it's Houston. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. I wanted to do something fun because I know that you're a long-suffering Falcons fan, and you have history, history. So I'm going to give you some names, and I want you to come up with 5 people that you would put on your Mount Rushmore for the Atlanta Falcons. And you can throw them out. You can throw out names if you don't agree. I've got Tony Gonzalez, Matt Ryan, Andre Rison, Jesse Tuggle, Morton Anderson, Michael Vick, Julio Jones, Roddy White, and of course Deion Sanders. And I want to throw in my personal favorite, a guy that I loved watching his film, was Billy White Shoes Johnson. I know he's an Oiler, but he had some really amazing plays as a Falcon. So,
yeah, I mean, that's a good list. It's a good list. Generally, when I think of like my Falcons Mount Rushmore, obviously because I'm almost 40, but not quite there, and 38, yeah.
Wow.
And I've been a Falcon fan for 30 years. Obviously, anybody prior to the 90s, I'm not as familiar with. Okay. So, unfortunately, I can't go there with White Shoes Johnson, but Jesse Tuggle, Deion Sanders, right in my wheelhouse. And so I usually put those guys up there. Matt Ryan's up there. Julio Jones is up there.
Okay.
Roddy White is always borderline because it feels like Roddy White should be up there for me. But if I'm limited with 4, it's probably Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Jesse Tuggle, and Deion Sanders. Just because Deion was at least when I started rooting for the team, the 1-star player on the team.
Yeah, at the house of crime built.
Yeah, and even though he only played like 4 or 5 years in Atlanta, my fandom is firmly attached to Deion being primetime and seeing primetime highlights early in the 90s.
And the fact that Tony Gonzalez started his career with the Kansas City Chiefs, is that part of the reason you wouldn't put him in a Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, that's the main thing with Tony Gonzalez. I mean, Michael Vick, if things had gone a little differently, he'd probably be up there as well, just because he was my favorite player for a very long time until he wasn't, So it's one of those things where like a lot of Falcon fans became Falcon fans because of Michael Vick. And so
me and my pit bull are over here in disgust right now.
I understand that.
It's okay, Zeus. Cover your ears.
You love him or you hate him. And so I get that sentiment. And, there were years where I loved him. There were years where I hated him. And now I'm just kind of like, generally, I guess I have a generally favorable opinion of Michael Vick in those years that he was here in Atlanta, or at least generally appreciate those years because, Falcon fans for a very long time didn't have a team that they could get particularly excited about until Michael Vick showed up.
And honestly, I think Michael Vick's Atlanta jersey is the most jersey his name is the most I've seen when it comes to Atlanta Falcons jerseys is always Michael Vick.
Yeah, I was in Ireland and I saw this little kid wearing a Michael Vick jersey.
In Ireland?
Yeah.
Wow. You've been to Ireland? That's pretty freaking dope, James.
Oh yeah, I've been quite a few.
I want to be like you when I grow up.
So so I want to thank you again, Aaron, so much for coming on. What we're going to do here in a couple of weeks, I want to get a roundtable going with everybody from the NFC South, and I'll get I'll be the moderator. I'll get a Bucks representative. I'd like to see if you'll come back on and represent Atlanta for us, just so that fans can get a up close and personal look at what we're going to be up against in the NFC South this year.
Yeah, whatever you need, Gene. I'm always down.
You're extremely knowledgeable, and you brought a lot of content to the show. We appreciate that.
And the reason I went to Aaron is very objective. Aaron is not going to sway one way. He's going to give you facts, and and he's very respectful of all the other teams, and I appreciate that. And that's one thing I've always respected about you, as a fan.
Yes, thank you for saying that, Gene. I appreciate that about you as well.
Because I remember there were years where I remember the Bucks were winless, and we were doing a show, and I was upfront and honest about it. The secondary is horrible, and I went down the line. But again, it was fun, and it was one of those things we can appreciate it now because of where we are. So again, I want to thank you, and I know that didn't mean to keep you on as long as we did, but you're greatly appreciated.
No problem. Love talking football with you all the time, Gene. We should do it again sometime.
All right, my friend. Again, folks, this is Aaron Freeman. If you're following him if you're not following him on Twitter, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you.
I'm about to follow you right now. What's your at?
At FalcFans, it's FalcFans, and of course, people can check me out daily, Monday through Friday, on the Locked On Falcons podcast.
Yeah, be sure to check it out. Very knowledgeable and great content. All right. Well, Ruth, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you. I'm sorry. I expected this to go a little bit longer, but I kind of ran out of questions and.
No, you're good. You're good. This is perfect timing because it gives me enough time to set up for the Tom Gronkowski show that will be going live at 9 p.m. for the Fans Only Sports Network. But follow me on Twitter is at Ruth the Truth with 3 H's at the end, and I will give you a follow back. I have a lot of content that's going to be flooding your feed, so get ready.
Yep, I'm looking forward to football season.
Me too. We're 45 days away or something like that?
Hey, you guys got a game tomorrow, don't you?
Who?
Where's the Hall of Fame game is tomorrow, isn't it? Or next week?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's Friday. You're right. I think it is Friday.
Tomorrow, isn't it? Or Thursday? Yeah. It's Thursday. What do I know?
Oh, actually, I think it is tomorrow.
Against the Squealers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll be watching that game. Go Pittsburgh.
For sure. Thanks.
I'm just joking. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. I'm going to go ahead and get up out of here. But again, be sure to check out Ruth the Truth. Aaron, thank you again for coming on. And we are out of here.
Have a good night. Go Bucks.